Move to questions without notice. Are there any questions? I give the call to the Honourable, the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Immigration. The Prime Minister promised Australians before the last election that a government's first job is to keep people safe. However, the Albanese government has released at least 149 hardcore criminals from immigration detention, including 7 murderers and 37 sex offenders. Why has the minister failed to apply for an order to re-detain a single one of these killers or sex offenders?
Order. The member for Spence is warned. Give the call to the Minister for Immigration, Citizenship and Multicultural Affairs.
Thank you, Speaker, and I thank the Leader of the Opposition for his question, and I refer him to the answer I gave in the last sitting week, in which I said those applications, I can assure the House, are underway, noting the concerns that have been expressed, including by the member for Wannon, about the high threshold that is required to succeed in such an application. Our top priority, Speaker, is keeping the community safe.
That's right.
And unlike those, opposite,
members on my left.
Unlike those opposite, we have confidence in the capacity of our law enforcement agencies to do so. We also recognise that it is in no one's interest to put in place an application that doesn't succeed. Rushed applications make no one safer.
Call order. Order. Members on my left and right will cease interjecting when the House comes to order. We'll hear from the member for Gilmore.
My question is to the Prime Minister. How will Labor's cost of living tax cuts help Australians, in particular women taxpayers, and what is standing in the way of these tax cuts?
Call to the Prime Minister.
I thank my friend, the member for Gilmore, for her question. I thank her for hosting me at Nowra once again the weekend before last at a successful country conference. On the 1st of July this year, our government wants to deliver a tax cut for every Australian taxpayer, all 13.6 million of them. We want people to earn more, and we want people to keep more of what they earn. But there are some barriers to this, Mr Speaker. The barriers to this are, of course, the Liberals in the other place are moving amendments to restore the principle of their unfair tax cuts on stage 3. And the Greens political party have foreshadowed amendments to kick it all off to a committee so the Senate can talk about it some more by the end of the month. We want these tax cuts to pass this week because women in particular will benefit from our tax cuts. 90% of women will be better off than under the old Morrison plan. This government has put economic opportunity for women at the heart of our agenda. And today, of course, we have required large companies to publish their gender pay gap. And what that's about is transparency, making sure that people are aware of exactly what companies are doing. This is added to the support we have for feminised industries, such as the 15% aged care worker increase that we've put in place. But those opposite, of course, don't even support that. Senator Canavan has gone onto the media saying the latest gender pay gap report is, to quote him, useless and would encourage men to support men's rights activists like social media identity Andrew Tate. Andrew Tate. He said this: this gender pay report must be the most useless set of data that a government agency has ever collected. So while some of them are out there saying this is a good thing and even claiming credit for it, others are out there saying it's completely useless. Well, Mr Speaker, what the Senate can do, with the support of the Liberals and the Greens, is to vote for these tax cuts and vote for them today. Vote for people to earn more and to keep more of what they earn, not stand in the way like the Liberals and the Greens want to do in the Senate, because this is what Australians deserve to deal with cost of living pressures.
The member for Fisher was interjecting continually during question time yesterday and it started today, so he'll cease interjecting. We've only had 2 questions. There's far too much noise in the chamber. I want to hear from the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
My question is to the Minister for Immigration. Buying a first home is getting harder and harder for young Australians, and the share of rental properties available to rent is now 54% below where it was at the start of the pandemic. And yet the Albanese Labor government has granted over 500,000 visas in the last year, with 1.6 million arrivals projected over the next 5 years. Where on earth will these people live, and what additional stress will this record number place on Australia's housing crisis?
Order. The member for Mitchell will cease interjecting. I want to hear from the Leader of the House.
Mr Speaker, once again, in terms of asking questions to the correct minister for their responsibilities, I know that it's possible for the Prime Minister to take any question or for it to go to any other minister, but the direction of questions is consistently, you listen to the whole preamble and where the question's headed, and it's going to a different minister to the person who has policy character.
Order. The member for Hume. I'm trying to deal with the point of order, and I want to hear from your leader, the Leader of the Opposition.
Well, thank you very much, Mr Speaker. As is well known, included in the ministerial responsibilities for the Minister for Immigration is the criteria that needs to be decided upon before he settles on the figure of 500,000 people a year. And the reality is that the minister needs to take into consideration, as he would, the advice from Treasury,
the Minister for Home Affairs,
the advice from Treasury and Finance and other departments about the impact of this Albanese government decision to bring in 1.6 million people in 5 years. And housing is a key part of that.
Prime Minister.
I think I'll sort this out by taking it, Mr Speaker.
Order.
As someone who has responsibility for housing and migration, Mr Speaker.
Members on my left and
because
right.
If they want to do something about housing, they can take that. They can support
Members
the
on my
Help to Buy
left.
scheme. If they want to do something about housing, they can support our Housing Australia Future Fund. If they want to do something about housing issues, they can support our housing accord to deliver an extra 1.2 million homes, Mr Speaker. And if they want to talk about migration, the Leader of the Opposition had this to say after the election during this term: we do need an increase in the migration numbers. It's clear that the number needs to be higher in 2022.
Order.
He went on to say, we need migration. We need migration. The government's announcement has been to increase the permanent migration intake has been delayed because of union pressure. But he boasted, Mr Speaker. He went on to say, I brought in record numbers of people from India, China and many other countries. But it wasn't just him, Mr Speaker. The Deputy Leader had a crack too. We know that urgently business needs a workforce, and much of that workforce needs to come from overseas. We could have had a campaign to attract those workers who, by the way, have got other options. They don't come to Australia. No one understands this better than regional MPs. And then we had the Shadow Minister for Immigration. Don't worry, you didn't miss either, sunshine. We need to get our international students back. We need to get our working holiday visa holders back. He was out there calling for more and more.
Order.
And when we talk about asylum seekers, of course, the former Deputy Secretary of the Immigration Department, Abdul Rizvi, had this to say about this bloke while he was in charge. In total, there were between 100,000 and 120,000 asylum applications lodged while Dutton was in charge. This is by far the largest number of asylum applications under any immigration minister in our history. Indeed it was, Mr Speaker. The record holder for backing in big immigration is sitting right there.
Order. Order. There's far too much noise on my right. The member for Moreton. I want to hear from the member for Higgins.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Women. How does publishing of the gender pay gaps work alongside other reforms by the Albanese Labor government to lift women's economic equality?
Give the call to the Minister representing the Minister for Women.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and can I thank the member for Higgins for the question and her championing women's equality here in this place. Of course, the Labor government is delivering on our promise to lead the way in closing the gender pay gap in Australia. Last year, we passed legislation that would increase transparency and reporting for gender pay gaps, and today this data has been released. And if those opposite were serious about this issue, they would immediately ask Senator Canavan to withdraw his comments about this data. If they are serious about it, they will rebuke him for the comments that he has made about the release of this data. The Workplace Gender Equality Agency has published gender pay gap data for nearly 5,000 Australian private sector employers for the first time ever. This is a historic step towards transparency and accountability in addressing gender inequality. We've seen a median total remuneration gender pay gap of 19%, or equivalent to $18,461 a year. 30% of Australian employers have a neutral gender pay gap of within 5% of zero, and that is good news. But it also means that over 2/3 of employers have a gender pay gap, which means that the majority of Australian workplaces have a long way to go to close their gender pay gaps. In every industry in Australia, the median of what a woman is paid is less than what the median of what a man is paid. For all employers, the publication of their gender pay gaps is a call to action, a call to focus their performance on gender equality, to take action and to improve it. For employees and for consumers, this will provide insights and information about where they work. Women continue to be overrepresented in lower paid roles and underrepresented in more senior, highly paid roles. That is why this government is working so hard to drive better outcomes for all workers, especially for women. It's actions that are making a difference for women's lives, like the tax cuts that you are stalling in the Senate. Tax cuts for every Australian woman taxpayer that will put money back into the pockets of Australian women. This plan will see a tax cut for every single woman who pays tax in Australia. Our plan will see Australian women taxpayers on average receive a tax cut of over $1,600 from the 1st of July, and it will see a bigger tax cut for over 90% of Australian women taxpayers, all 5.8 million of them. Labor's efforts are already delivering outcomes for women, with the gender pay gap now at a record low. The publication of gender pay gaps is a critical tool to continue this important work to ultimately achieve gender equality in Australia. And if those opposite were serious, they would rebuke Senator Canavan for his comments, and they would absolutely make sure that they pass Labor's tax cuts in the Senate today.
Just to remind the Minister, I didn't want to interrupt her in flow, Standing Order 65 about addressing remarks through the chair. Before I call the member for Griffith, I'm pleased to inform the House that present in the gallery today are representatives from Dementia Australia as guests of the member for Forrest and Senator Helen Polley, and I welcome the outgoing CEO, Ms Marie McCabe AM, and the King himself, Mr Wally Lewis AM. On behalf of the House, welcome to you all. And I give the call to the member for Griffith.
Question to the Prime Minister. Since the Reserve Bank review, the Greens have opposed the government's proposal to remove its power to protect renters and mortgage holders from unreasonable interest rate rises. Former Prime Minister Keating and 2 former RBA governors have publicly agreed with us that big political decisions like interest rate rises require political accountability. Will you admit your government was wrong to try and give up its power to overrule unreasonable interest rate increases and back the Greens' change to the bill?
Order. Order. Prime Minister has the call.
Speaker, what's surprising here isn't that the Greens political party have that position. It's that the Liberal Party, or some of them, are saying that they'll back you on that as well. We'll see what happens in the Senate. But we had an RBA review, and the government's response is all about reinforcing the independence of the Reserve Bank. The independence of the Reserve Bank to deal...
Order. The member for Hume.
To deal with monetary policy, and the government's responsibility through the budget to deal with fiscal policy. And we want them, of course, to work together, which is what we have been doing, which is why we produced the first budget surplus in 15 years. Now, Senator McKim has shown through his sniping from the sidelines that he knows nothing about how the RBA functions, and he doesn't understand the review. And he has found a kindred spirit in the Shadow Treasurer. The Shadow Treasurer was consulted by the Treasurer for more than a year, and he has never mentioned once any proposal to override power as a concern. This only shows that it's all about political posturing and opportunism, and not considered.
The member for Hume is going to cease interjecting for the remainder of this answer, or to be warned.
Not a considered view about the policy. What is clear is that the Shadow Treasurer not only cannot get a question to the Treasurer in question time, he has no authority amongst his colleagues who are trying to go down a populist route. Now, the Treasurer has done his best to be bipartisan,
the member for
reasonable.
Groom will cease interjecting.
The light shines upon the member for Groom, Mr Speaker, but it doesn't make him any brighter. Mr Speaker.
Order.
Mr
Just
Speaker.
Order. Members on my left. Just going to ask the Prime Minister. Just the member for Barker. Just going to ask the Prime Minister to withdraw that comment.
I withdraw, Mr Speaker.
To assist the House. Order.
Senator Hume has said this, which is beyond my comprehension. In fact, it keeps the RBA more independent if the government can override them. That's the position of their shadow minister in the other place. They want to side with the Greens. You can wear it. You can wear it, because we expect economic irresponsibility from them, but we expect a little bit better from mainstream political parties.
Order. Hear from the member for Newcastle.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Workplace Relations. How are the Albanese Labor government's workplace relations reforms helping to close the gender pay gap?
Give a call to the Minister for Employment, Workplace Relations and the Minister for the Arts.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. And I want to thank the member for Newcastle, someone who's always advocated that releasing gender pay gap data is effective. And you'll always have people on this side know that releasing that sort of data is effective. You will only find on the other side of politics anyone arguing that it's useless. We have, with the data that's just been released, we now have the gender pay gap at its lowest ever level, and overnight we've had the release of the company-by-company data. The days of secretly paying women less than men are now over. That's as a result of particular changes that have been made by law by this government. It's part of a suite of measures aimed at closing the gender pay gap. There was one time in the previous term where there was a sharp fall in the gender pay gap. It was in the November 2020 figure. But it wasn't because women's wages were suddenly rising. It was because lockdowns happened and male wages collapsed. And that was the only time that you had a sharp decrease or closure of the gender pay gap. The view of this government is the way to close the gender pay gap is to get wages moving and to look at where there is a disadvantage in feminised industries and change the laws so that those wages move too. The data that's been published shows that you have 30% of businesses that are published in the target range, but for more than 60% of companies, women are still paid more than 5% less than men. That's why this government's taken the measures that we have. It's why we've banned the pay secrecy clauses. It's why we've expanded access to flexible work arrangements. It's why we have now a positive duty to protect against sexual harassment, why we established 10 days paid family and domestic violence leave. Every one of these changes deals with participation as well. Every one of these changes corrects a system which has structurally disadvantaged women workers. It should be the case that when you go to work and you work hard and you get paid, that pay is reflected simply by the effort that you've made and what you have brought to that job. But as we see with company after company after company, women are still in a situation where that gap, while lower than it has ever been in the history of it being recorded, is still structurally too high. As long as there are those opposite that think that acting on this and publishing this data is somehow useless, then we have a group opposite that has no intention of closing the gender pay gap, which explains why they have opposed each of the laws we brought in to close it.
Order. The Deputy Leader of the Opposition will cease interjecting or she'll be warned. Give a call to the member for Hume.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Assistant Treasurer and Minister for Financial Services. I refer the Minister to his response in the House yesterday, where he asserted that as a result of the government's new family car and ute tax, the Australian people are going to have access to cheaper fuels. Can the Minister explain the government's plan to reduce the price of a litre of petrol?
Order. Order. I give the call. The members on my right will cease interjecting. Give the call to the Assistant Treasurer and the Minister for Financial Services.
I thank the Shadow Treasurer for his question. And it's quite clear from this question the position that they have adopted on the RBA, and in fact their entire record when they were in government, that the Leader of the Opposition has adopted drongo economics. What is quite clear from the policy that has been announced by our Minister is that we want Australian motorists to have the same benefits that motorists in the United States, in the United Kingdom, throughout Europe, and in fact in the majority of countries around the world have, and that is access to better fuel efficiency standards in their motor vehicle. Because what that means is that when they pull out of the petrol station, they know that every litre of fuel is going to go further because they have the most efficient fuel standards in their vehicles in the world.
Order.
The member for Hume may want Australian motorists to pay more for every kilometre that they travel, but we on this side do not.
Assistant Treasurer, has he completed his answer? Order. Order. Give order. Members on my left. Members on my left. The member for Barker. The member for Barker has had a good go. He is warned. Give the call to the member for McEwen.
My question is to the Minister for Health. How many of the Albanese Labor government's 50 Medicare urgent care clinics have now opened? How are they helping to strengthen Medicare? And how is the government working cooperatively with states and territories to improve health services after a decade of cuts and neglect?
Give the call to the Minister for Health and Aged Care.
Well, Speaker, I wonder first on indulgence whether I can add my welcome to Marie McCabe and thank her for her long leadership of Dementia Australia on behalf of the hundreds of thousands of families who are impacted by dementia, one of Australia's most important patient organisations. I also want to thank the member for McEwen for this important question because, as he knows, we did promise 50 Medicare urgent care clinics to be open over the course of last year, and instead we delivered 58, open 7 days a week, extended hours, available for walk-ins and, importantly, fully bulk billed. And we plan to deliver even more this year, Mr Speaker. And our dear friend and colleague Peter Murphy she promised to deliver an urgent care clinic in Frankston, one of a series of commitments that she made and she delivered for better health care in her community. And since the 30th of June, Mr Speaker, that clinic has delivered more than 12,000 services to the people of Dunkley. More than 1 in 3 of those services have been delivered to kids under the age of 15, providing an option for anxious parents who need urgent care for their kids out of hours or on the weekends or simply when they can't get in to their normal GP. Like Amanda, who wrote to us and said, "I'm so grateful for this service. I took my 2-year-old for review today when I couldn't get an appointment. She was seen straight away, wonderful and timely care for my boy, who is now on the mend." Better urgent care when and where people need it, Mr Speaker, but also an option that means people don't have to go to the hospital. More than 60% of patients attending the Frankston clinic say they would otherwise have had to go to the Frankston Emergency Department, like Paul, Mr Speaker, who said we really needed attention when most of the GPs were closed for a closed head injury. It kept us from having to visit the Frankston Emergency Department. Thank you. And that's why, Mr Speaker, as the member for McEwen points out, our government has worked so closely with states and territories to ensure that these urgent care clinics are located where they'll have the most benefit for hospital systems. Now, of course, the Leader of the Opposition had a different idea for relieving pressure on our hospital EDs, Mr Speaker. It wasn't a new model of care. It wasn't a network of new clinics. Instead, he announced in his first budget as Health Minister, Mr Speaker, that he wanted states to start charging a fee at the emergency department, fitting out all of our triage statements in the 750 public hospitals around Australia with EFTPOS machines, Mr Speaker. That was his idea of relieving pressure on EDs, fitting for a man, of course, who wanted to introduce a GP tax as well. Well, Mr Speaker, we are proud of the legacy Peter Murphy led, the measures that we've put in place to make it easier and cheaper to see a doctor in the electorate of Dunkley, and we're determined to protect those measures from this man.
Give the call to the honourable member for Bowman.
My question is to the Minister for Infrastructure and Transport. Managing Director of Mazda Australia, Vinesh Bindi, has said of Labor's new family car and ute tax, quote, "The time frame is too ambitious, and secondly, maybe the government hasn't really educated themselves on the costs that would go on to the consumer." Yet the Minister for Climate Change and Energy has said, quote, "No particular model will go up." Who is right, the Managing Director of Mazda or the Minister for Climate Change?
Give the call to the Minister. Order. No. Order. The member for O'Connor does not interject before I call the Minister. Order. I want to give the call to the Minister for Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development and Local Government.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and can I thank the member for Bowman for that question. Well, it feels a bit like Groundhog Day, Mr Speaker. The same people that said that, frankly, the minimum wage would wreck the economy, our tax cuts for all Australians was Marxist economics and a war on hard-working Australians, the same people who said the weekend would be over and there'd be no more barbecues for everybody. We all know that what those say opposite is, frankly, demonstrably untrue, and now, of course, we are seeing it again. Instead of making claims that they know are false, those opposite need to explain why they think hard-working Australians should be denied access to cars that are cheaper to run. That is the campaign that those opposite are running. They need to explain why he wants Australians buying a new car to pay more for petrol than they need to. And again, I want to quote a very auspicious Australian, I will say, on this matter, someone who might have known a thing or two about the introduction of fuel efficiency standards, and remind the House that when this very, very good member at the time stated when they were looking to introduce fuel efficiency standards, this is what they said. When fuel efficiency standards were introduced in the US, the most popular models before introduction stayed the most popular models after introduction, what we would call utes. There wasn't a material change in price, and we don't expect there would be a material change in price here. Who said that? That was, of course, the member for Bradfield. The member for Bradfield, when he was introducing the fuel efficiency standards back, I think, in 2018. We know that those opposite that we know that Australians are missing out on fuel savings because those opposite did not have the courage of their convictions when it came to fuel efficiency standards. Right now, Australians are missing out on millions of dollars of fuel savings that they could have saved if this government had have actually pursued that. On this side of the House, we want Australians to have greater choice of new vehicles and pay less for their hard-earned cash on fuel.
Give a call to the member for Reid.
My question is to the Minister for Social Services. How will the Albanese Labor government's tax cuts support workers who deliver essential support services in the community?
Call to the Minister for Social Services.
Well, thank you, Speaker, and I'd like to thank the member for Reid for her question. And we visited some such workers just last week in her electorate and thank her for sticking up for workers in her electorate, but right across Australia. Now, the Albanese Labor government is delivering a tax cut for every taxpayer, which will provide meaningful cost of living relief for Middle Australia on the 1st of July this year. Now, under Labor's tax plan, the average Australian worker will get more than double the tax cut they would have received under the previous government's plan. This means workers will have more money in their pocket on the 1st of July. Indeed, 84% of taxpayers will now receive a bigger tax cut. Now, some of the workers that will keep more of what they earn from Labor's tax plan are our social and community service workers. These workers are often the first port of call, providing support to some of the most vulnerable people in our community. The support provided by these workers touch the lives of those experiencing poverty, disadvantage and hardship. These are the workers that are delivering our government's Escaping Violence program, working day in and out of facilitating financial assistance and providing confidential support for people who have recently left a violent intimate partner. Now, these caseworkers deserve to keep more of what they earn. These workers earn approximately $88,000 a year, and under Labor they will receive a tax cut of $1,879. That's $800 more than they would have otherwise received. Now, the Albanese Labor government is committed to supporting our community sector workers. This has not just been evidenced by our bigger, better tax cuts, but also our decision to increase indexation and supplementation payments to more than 700 community organisations. These payments are critical to ensure that community service workers get the wage increases they are entitled to. Now, it is clear from our actions that our government wants workers to earn more and keep more of what they earn. Those opposite want people to work longer for less. And nothing demonstrates this more clearly than their vocal opposition to our bigger, better tax cuts. Of course, the opposition have called our tax cuts Marcus, electoral scam. They have made their intention clear in the Senate.
Minister will pause. The Manager of Opposition on point of order.
Well, Mr Speaker, on relevance, it was in fact a commendably tightly drafted question. There is no basis for the Minister to be getting into the territory she's now getting into.
I'm just going to ask the Minister to return to her question, return to her answer.
Well, of course, this government is putting the tax cuts through the Senate now, and those opposite should not play petty politics. Get out of the way. Support our tax cuts, support Middle Australia. This government will, while you do not.
Before I call the member for Gippsland, I am delighted to inform the House that today we are joined in the gallery today by my friend the Honourable Speaker from the Republic of Fiji, who's joined alongside 6 Fijian members of Parliament. On behalf of the House, Bula Vinaka to our visitors and colleagues from Fiji to question time. Give the call to the honourable member for Gippsland.
Well, thank you, Speaker. And my question is to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. Yesterday, the Minister claimed there will be no purchase price impact, despite the Federal Chamber of Automotive Industry estimate that Labor's new family car and ute tax could cost $38 billion in penalties over 5 years based on 2023 sales, and these would be paid for by Australians. Why is the Minister refusing to be upfront with the Australian people about the impact of this new tax?
Give the call to the order. We don't need the sound effects for dramatic. Order. The Minister for Climate Change and Energy has the call.
Well, thank you very much, Mr Speaker. And the reason I appreciate the question from the honourable gentleman so much is that it enables me to correct several of the myths and misinformation that the opposition is peddling in relation to this policy, including the one that the honourable member just perpetuated. Now, in relation to the FCAI's figures, the FCAI themselves have said since releasing that figure that it was, and I quote, a very simple analysis, and they went on to say, we're not saying that sales from 2023 will be replicated, we're just saying that if it was replicated, that's what the cost would be. Their own modelling, which they've submitted, indicates that they're going to increase EV sales, and just, Mr Speaker—
Order. The Minister will pause. Order. The Minister will pause. There is far too much noise. I cannot hear a word that anyone is saying in this chamber. But the Deputy Leader of the Opposition, I don't know how many times when I'm speaking, it is definitely not the time to interject. Trust me. The Minister for Resources will cease interjecting as well. And I give the call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
And just in the last half an hour, Mr Speaker, we've seen evidence of that, with the announcement by Toyota that they are about to start importing their first ever electric vehicle into Australia, Mr Speaker, which we very much welcome, which indicates very much, Mr Speaker, that this extra choice for Australian people is something that can be delivered. Now, it's not just us. It's not just us who believe this, Mr Speaker. The member for Gippsland might want to have a little word in the shell-like ear of our old friend, the member for Bradfield, Mr Speaker, who has dealt with these sort of scare campaigns in the past, and I must say very eloquently and very commendably and very efficiently knocked all the scare campaigns away. It is very eloquent op-ed in the Australian, which is still on his website as we speak today, Mr Speaker, still up on his website this afternoon, where he said, Mr Speaker, the evidence from overseas is that there will be no increase in prices for any car, and he was right, Mr Speaker. My New Year's resolution is to be kinder and fairer to the opposition. I'm going to start with the member for Bradfield by quoting him approvingly on a regular basis, Mr Speaker, because he deserves nothing less. He made the case. Now, in relation to others, again, Mr Speaker, I draw the attention of the member for Gippsland to Hyundai, Volkswagen, BMW, Kia and Volvo, who've all welcomed the government's new vehicle efficiency standard, Mr Speaker, all of them. And motoring organisations, the NRMA, the RACQ and the RACWA, for example, who called for us to do exactly what we have done, Mr Speaker. The real question for the opposition is why do they want to stand in the way of better choices and better savings for motorists right across Australia? Why does the member for Gippsland, whose average constituent drives 17,830 kilometres a year, why does the member for Gippsland not want that constituent to receive $1,417 worth of fuel savings if they buy a new car in 2028? Why is the opposition so against better choices for Australians, Mr Speaker? Why are they against even their own policy that they took to the last election, Mr Speaker, because they don't believe in better choice for motorists?
Concluded. Order. The member for Wright, the member for Groom and the Leader of the Nationals are warned. Give a call to the member for Bendigo.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Industry and Science. How is the Albanese Labor government supporting our manufacturing industry? How will Labor's tax cuts benefit Australian food manufacturing workers? Are the facts about the impact of government's policy being disputed?
Call to the Minister for Industry and Science.
Thank you, Speaker, and I thank the member for Bendigo. And I also want to note her keen and enduring interest in food manufacturing, particularly in regional Australia. Food manufacturing, the single biggest sector of Australian manufacturing, directly employing nearly 200,000 Australians and providing huge value add to our agricultural sector. It's the economic and industrial lifeblood for many regional towns and outer suburban communities, and a vital part of our growing manufacturing sector that now employs
more than 930,000 Australians, over 85,000 new jobs added to the sector compared to when those opposite were last in government. 40% of employees in food manufacturing are women, and we're supporting manufacturing workers by helping them to earn more across the manufacturing industry. Workers are earning $144 more per week on our watch, and Labor's tax cuts will mean that the average food and beverage manufacturing worker will get a tax cut of $1,206. So it's clear, earn more, keep more on this side, work longer for less on that side. That is the big difference. Now, I'm asked about whether the facts about the impacts of what we are doing is being disputed, and the answer is absolutely yes. We've seen the mindless, obstructive negativity of those opposite. When we wanted to invest in manufacturing capability, they vote against the $15 billion National Reconstruction Fund. When we want to shield manufacturers from the worst of energy price rises, they vote against our energy price relief. They're only interested in talking about manufacturing if they can talk it down. And surprisingly, it's the Deputy Leader of the Opposition who writes an op-ed in The Australian calling our manufacturing sector a graveyard, and also goes on to say it's littered with the bodies of once great companies, claiming that the rate of insolvencies was higher than it's ever been. And it's just a futile attempt, because when those claims have been examined independently, they are not supported by fact. But it's not the only doozy. I mean, I still remember, Speaker, when the Deputy Leader said there were no electric utes anywhere in the world. And then that became awkward. I don't know.
Order. The Minister will pause. The Deputy Leader of the Opposition is going to has been continually interjecting non-stop during question time in this answer. She's warned. And the member for Hume is also warned. Non-stop interjections are just unacceptable to every answer. So for the remainder of this answer, I don't want any more interjections. The Minister has the call.
Thanks, Speaker. No claim too outrageous. Nothing stands in the way. I don't know if George Costanza has been hired as a special strategic advisor. You know it's not a lie if you believe it. Very much the case in terms of the Deputy Leader.
Order.
Australian manufacturing, alive and well, we're backing it, and we would expect better from those opposite.
Give the call to the member, the Manager of Opposition Business.
Speaker, the Minister just used an unparliamentary term and he should withdraw it.
That was an interjection about nothing.
Or was it the order? Was it the order? I didn't hear the unparliament. Was it an unparliamentary term? Was this the Seinfeld reference? Okay. Order. To assist the House? No. To assist the House, I'll ask the Minister to withdraw.
Absolutely withdraw. Thank you.
Order. We're just going to go and hear from. I'd like to hear from the member for Mayo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Health and Aged Care. A Head to Health adult mental health service was promised for my community of Mayo in early 2022, nearly 2 years ago. When will this service open its doors?
Give the call to the Minister for Health and Aged Care.
Thank you, Speaker, and I thank the member for Mayo for her question. I take the opportunity to point out that the member for Mayo has an electorate which had the second largest increase in bulk billing in November and December, an 8.9% increase in bulk billing, with 13,000 additional free visits to the general practitioner in just those 2 months. She points out, though, a very important commitment that's been made by the former government that we have committed to continuing, and that is the establishment of a Head to Health centre in Mount Barker in the Adelaide Hills. A Head to Health service is a new model here in Australia. It, like the urgent care clinics, is a walk-in service. You don't need to make an appointment. It's fully bulk billed, so fully free of charge, and is designed to provide a service for people who need urgent mental health support. That might be a person experiencing very real distress who needs some support in the immediate sense and then a referral perhaps to another service or back to their usual practitioner, or people with more severe and complex mental illness for whom there are limited services. I think members across this chamber would agree right now. We're establishing a network of 61, including 5 services in South Australia. 2 are currently open, one in the centre of Adelaide and one in the member for Barker's electorate, I think, in Mount Gambier. And 3 of them will be opened over the course of this year. One in Mount Barker in the Adelaide Hills, one in Northern Adelaide and one in Port Pirie in the member for Grey's electorate. I'm advised that the tender was completed by Country SA Primary Health Network, the PHN, that covers, I think, the entirety of the member for Mayo's electorate. That tender was closed at the end of last year, and the intention is to have that service operating by mid to late 2024.
Give the call to the honourable member for Solomon.
Yeah, thanks, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Housing and Homelessness. How is the Albanese Labor government helping to ease cost of living pressures, particularly for those Australians who are trying to buy a home? And what is standing in the way of that assistance?
Give a call to the Minister for Housing, Homelessness and the Minister for Small Business.
Thanks, Mr Speaker, and I want to thank the member for Solomon for that great question. Can I say, Mr Speaker, we do know that some people are doing it particularly tough at the moment, which is why we're working to deliver real assistance to help ease cost of living pressures for Australians. Indeed, through our plans to boost wages and our new tax cuts, we want Australians to earn more and to keep more of what they earn, Mr Speaker. Come July 1, every Australian taxpayer will receive a tax cut. That's 13.6 million Australians getting a tax cut, Mr Speaker, and the vast majority will be getting a bigger tax cut under Labor's plan. But we also have a plan to help Australians who want to buy their first home or buy a home, Mr Speaker. Our Help to Buy shared equity program will be life-changing for tens of thousands of Australians. It will provide a pathway to home ownership for people who have been locked out. It is targeted and aimed at low and middle income earners deliberately because we know that many renters could service a mortgage but can't get the deposit, Mr Speaker. Help to Buy will help these low and middle income Australians get over the hurdle of a deposit and enjoy ongoing savings thanks to smaller repayments. Eligible participants will only need a 2% deposit for the program, and the government will then support them with an equity stake of up to 30% for existing homes or 40% for new homes. And we know that Help to Buy will be critical for many Australians because we have heard from them about what this will mean. Like Chris from Canberra, who said without Help to Buy he, and I quote, would not be able to afford a property for many years. And Gemma from Sydney, who said, and I quote, Help to Buy would completely reorientate my life. And then there's Stephen from Brisbane. I'm not sure if it's the member over there, I doubt it, but he said he has enough savings to buy through shared equity, but not without this help from the government, Mr Speaker. These are real people who need this real assistance to get into home ownership, Mr Speaker. But what do we have? We have those opposite and those over here who are blocking this, Mr Speaker. Those opposite and their friends in the Greens are teaming up again to again stop Australians from getting into housing. They've already teamed up to delay, of course, the Housing Australia Future Fund that will deliver 30,000 social and affordable homes for those Australians that need it most. And now they're joining forces to keep low and middle income Australians locked out of home ownership, Mr Speaker. We have a mandate to implement this program. We took this to the last election. The party over here who claim that they want to support more Australians into home ownership should be supporting it, Mr Speaker. And indeed, we've already helped now more than 100,000 Australians into home ownership through the expanded and improved Home Guarantee Scheme. Mr Speaker, this week they have a chance in this place to support getting more Australians into home ownership, and they should be supporting the 40,000 Australians that will benefit from it.
We've called on a member for Flinders.
My question is to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
I refer to Labor's new family car and ute tax. In my home state of Victoria in 2023, 78% of sales were either SUVs or light commercial vehicles and utes. The top-selling cars were the Ford Ranger, Toyota Hilux and the Isuzu D-Max. Industry analysis shows that they would attract penalties of up to $17,000, $14,000 and $13,000 respectively by 2029. Why does this Labor government want to punish Aussie families and tradies for their choices?
Just before I call the minister, I want to hear from the member for Goldstein on a point of order.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Standing Order 100. Questions must not contain statements of facts unless they can be authenticated, nor containing hypothetical matter. The question is based on a false premise, and we should not be spreading disinformation in this chamber in questions or answers.
Order. Order. The member for Petrie will leave the chamber under 94A. And I ask all members to show respect when members are taking points of order. That was utterly disrespectful. Whilst I understand the member's point, and she's entitled to raise a point of order, order. Members on my right, I want to hear from. I didn't hear what was said. I was trying to deal with the member's point of order. There's a lot happening today. I'm just going to ask everyone for silence so I can hear from the member for Wannon.
Help the House if the member for McEwen withdrew.
Just ask the member to withdraw. I thank the member for McEwen. Whilst Standing Order 100, the member is correct. I'm sure the member, I can't vouch for everything that is said in every single question or answer. I respect the member for Flinders that she has done her homework and she has done her research, but I'm not the judge of whether that research is accurate or not. So the minister will be able to respond whether he believes the member to be correct or not, whether he believes that they might perhaps. The member for Goldstein on a point of order.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I would merely say facts are facts. They're not a matter of opinion.
Resume your seat. Order. I'm just going to call the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. And again, I very much welcome the question and the chance to correct the misinformation being put by those opposite. And the member for Flinders will be interested to know that her average constituent drives 18,911 kilometres a year and would save $1,503 in fuel costs, Mr Speaker, if they had access to more efficient cars. The member for Flinders might want to explain to her constituents why she's against more choice for them. Now, this is the latest, Mr Speaker, in a long line of misinformation we have. We have the continual claims from those opposite about car prices. Now, the analysis released by the Minister for Transport and I made very clear that in no country that has introduced vehicle efficiency standards have increases in the price of cars resulted from that policy. The member for Bradfield, he agrees with that. He agrees with that, Mr Speaker, because he said it himself on many occasions when he was very, very eloquently putting the case. Now, this is just the latest example of misinformation, Mr Speaker. We saw the Leader of the Opposition last week talking about the current situation.
No, the minister will pause. I have been very generous with the member for Hume and explained to him in quite detail about his interjections and being warned, and he'll leave the chamber under 94A. That is not how question time will operate. The minister will be heard in silence.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Leader of the Opposition said last week, on February the 9th, now we have some of the highest efficiency standards in the world in terms of our vehicles. Now, there's a couple of small problems with that statement. You could argue about whether the highest or the lowest if they existed, Mr Speaker, but the fact of the matter is Australia doesn't have any fuel efficiency standards, a point that was made by the member for Bradfield in his op-ed in The Australian when he said 80% of the global vehicle passenger fleet is subject to fuel efficiency standards, but Australia has none. And we've seen other examples, Mr Speaker. A man who's received a bit of attention in question time today, Senator Canavan, not the most outrageous thing he said, but it's pretty outrageous. He said, the government of Australia has decided to introduce the world's most aggressive emissions limits on vehicles here in Australia. Again, Mr Speaker, clear misinformation when you consider, I confess to the House, the standards that the Minister for Transport and I are consulting on are proposing are less ambitious than those that exist in Europe, in New Zealand and in other key markets, Mr Speaker, because we have carefully designed them to deliver benefits to the Australian people. $140 billion in benefits to all Australians between now and 2050, Mr Speaker. $12 billion in fuel savings for motorists by 2030, Mr Speaker. The average new car buyer in 2028 will cut their annual fuel costs by around $1,000, Mr Speaker. Health benefits, which is why this policy has been welcomed by the Australian Medical Association, as well as the peak motoring groups, the NRMA, Mr Speaker, and called for by the RACQ and the RACW and welcomed by Hyundai, Volkswagen, BMW, Kia and Volvo, to name a few. This is what good policy looks like. Careful consultation over a 12-month period, taking many submissions and putting Australian motorists first while those opposite put Australian motorists last, equal with the motorists in Russia, where the Leader of the Opposition wants to align his policy.
Call to the member for Canberra.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Education. What is the Albanese Labor government doing to support workers and students in the education system?
Call to the Minister for Education.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker, and can I thank the outstanding member for Canberra for her question. On the 1st of July, every Australian taxpayer will get a tax cut, and that includes childcare workers. A childcare worker on $40,000 a year will get a tax cut of more than $600. It also includes teachers. A school teacher on, say, $90,000 a year will get a tax cut of more than $1,900. And it also includes nurses. A nurse on $75,000 a year will get a tax cut of more than $1,500. Now, a lot of these jobs require a university degree. On the weekend, I released the university's accord. As I told the House yesterday, we'll release the first stage of our response to the accord in the next few months. But one of the things that it recommends is financial support for teaching and nursing students when they're doing their prac. It makes the point that if you're a nursing student, you're spending 800 hours working in a hospital where you're not paid. If you're a teaching student, you're spending about 600 hours in a classroom where you're not paid. And to do this prac, you're often having to move or travel long distances, and sometimes you might have to give up your part-time job. A lot of us in this place know how important those part-time jobs are when you're at university. Working at Sizzler helped get me through university. The Prime Minister worked at Pancakes on the Rocks, am I right? Indeed. When you were at university. The Minister for Local Government worked at Pedro's Mexican restaurant. The member for Hinkler worked as a paid lifeguard when he was doing his engineering degree at university. I see him nodding. The Minister for Aged Care. The Minister for Aged Care served tea and coffee with her mum in an aged care centre when she was studying at university. The Minister for Skills, my bench buddy over there, worked in a petrol station and on an assembly line to get him through university. The member for Patterson pulled beers at the brewery in Newcastle. So a lot of us all across the chamber have stories like that. You worked in a butcher's shop, didn't you?
Order.
Yeah. Mr Speaker, right now there are millions of hard-working Australians doing these jobs full-time. Cooks, waiters, bartenders, assembly line workers, aged care workers, and every one of them who pays tax will get a tax cut on the 1st of July. All Australian taxpayers will get a tax cut because we want Australians to earn more and keep more of what they earn.
Give the call to the honourable member for Curtin.
This is a question for the Prime Minister. Voters have a right to know who is funding their candidates before they vote. The government has a long real-time disclosure all my donations. The government has a long-standing commitment to real-time disclosure.
Order. The member will resume her seat. The same rules apply to everyone. There's going to be silence so questions can be heard. No matter what's being said, the questioner has to be heard in silence. And that goes for everyone in the chamber. So the member for Curtin will start her question again.
Voters have a right to know who is funding their candidates before they vote. The government has a long-standing commitment to real-time disclosure of political donations over $1,000, but this hasn't happened because the government has indicated it wants opposition support on electoral reform. Time is running out to implement transparency before the next election. Why won't the government make good on its promise and pass this legislation immediately with cross-bench support in both houses? We need transparency now.
Give a call to the Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank the member for Curtin for her question and for her genuine commitment to transparency. We have, through our minister, engaged in good-natured discussion, good faith discussion with the crossbenchers, but also with the opposition. Because what we want to put in place is electoral reform that lasts over a period of time, that doesn't seek to secure a political advantage for any particular side of politics or indeed for independents running as well. And I've had representation, as you would be aware, both in meetings I've had with the crossbench but otherwise as well, from people who've been supportive of the crossbench about the crossbench being enlarged, if I can put it that way, by people who put forward different positions with regard to the range of transparency measures which we have historically supported. We do support disclosure for all donations above $1,000. That's something that we, in fact, had in place, got changed by the former coalition government. It's something that we think is entirely appropriate. It is important to have faith in the political system, that we know where donations are coming from. And the billionaires funding the Advance campaign of misinformation at the moment are a great example, of where it is appropriate to have...
Members on my left.
You said the quiet bit out loud, guys.
The Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
I thought they had nothing to do with Advance, Mr Speaker. Nothing to do with it at all. It's very coordinated, the campaign, and it's an example. It's an example of where you see, the bloke who's trying to smile more and be a little bit nice and less nasty has the nasty stuff, more overt, being run by the Advance campaign, so he can just run the little bit nasty stuff. It is important. It is important that transparency occurs. We're committed to it. We've received the JSCEM report. We look forward to acting on it, but we do want to act in a way that brings the maximum number of support for it, because the fact is that on a range of issues, I can think of at least two that have been raised today, we can't get things through the Senate because of the coalition of the Liberals and the Greens blocking it. So that's why we want to reach out across the chamber to make sure that any proposals are carried.
Call to the honourable member for Paterson.
Thanks, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Regional Development, Local Government and Territories. How's the Albanese Labor government responding to the economic times and delivering tax cuts for Australians who live in our regions?
Give a call to the Minister for Regional Development, Local Government and Territories.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the wonderful member for Paterson for the question and the amazing work she does in her electorate, where 75,000 taxpayers will receive on average a tax cut of $1,500. That's 87% of taxpayers in the electorate of Paterson who will be better off under Labor's tax cuts. Mr Speaker, I'm proud to be part of a government that puts everyday Australians at the forefront of decision-making, most importantly those who live in our regions. We want to make a real difference to people living in our regions. We want people to earn more and to keep more of what they earn. And, Mr Speaker, we have delivered, because people across regional Australia will receive a tax cut on 1 July. Labor's tax cuts mean that a water and sewer apprentice in Roma on $42,000 a year will receive a tax cut of $714, who wouldn't have received a tax cut under the plan from those opposite. Under Labor's tax cuts, a hard-working first-year teacher in Deniliquin on $95,000 a year will receive a tax cut of $2,054. And a dairy farmer in Harvey, Western Australia, on $67,000 a year will see a tax cut of $1,354. Those opposite want to see people work longer for less in our regions, while we want to see people earn more and keep more of what they earn. And I hear directly from Aussies around the country when I travel in my capacity as Minister for Regional Development. I listen to communities, I talk to them about the things that they want to see and the actions that they want our government to take. And I've said it before and I'll say it again, people in regional Australia are seeing more from this government than they did from those opposite in 10 years. We've tripled the bulk billing incentive. 660,000 people and small businesses have had upgrades to their NBN connections under our plans. We've seen more mobile phone black spot towers rolling out, life-saving upgrades in our regions. We've helped 13,000 people getting to their first home with the Regional First Time Buyers Grant. We've made early child education cheaper for 1.26 million families, including 265,000 families in regional Australia, not to mention backing a wage increase for those on minimum wages through Fair Work and a 15% pay rise for aged care workers across our communities. The Albanese Labor government is committed to delivering for our regions. We're committed to delivering tax cuts for every Australian worker, and we want them to earn more and keep more of what they earn.
Call to the member for Braddon.
Thanks, Speaker. My question's to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. My home state of Tasmania in 23, 81.1% of vehicle sales were either SUVs or light commercial vehicles or utes. Top-selling cars were Hilux, Ford, Ranger and MG MG3. Industry analysis shows that they would attract penalties of more than $14,000, $17,000 and $11,000 respectively.
Order.
Why does this Labor government continue to punish Aussie families and tradies in the bush where they're trying to earn a living?
Order. 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 The Minister for Health will cease interjecting. The Minister for Infrastructure will too. The Minister for Climate Change and Energy has the call.
Well, thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Again, it appears I appreciate the question more than the honourable member appreciates being asked to answer, Mr Speaker. Perhaps the honourable member is a little bit embarrassed about opposing a policy which would save his constituents $1,009 a year in petrol costs, Mr Speaker, by giving them a choice of better cars in this country. Now, the honourable member in the question that was written for him has mischaracterised, of course, the policy design that has been put forward and consulted upon by the Minister for Transport and I. I'm a little surprised the question got through tactics, because the chair of the Tactics Committee is the member for Bradfield, who has views about this matter. The House will be shocked to learn. Shocked to learn about the availability of utes in countries with fuel efficiency standards. And he pointed out, for example, and I quote, "So when fuel efficiency standards were introduced in the US, the most popular models before introduction stayed the most popular models after introduction, essentially what Americans call pickup trucks and what we would call utes, like the Chevy Silverado. There wasn't a material change in price, and we don't expect there would be a material change in price here, Mr Speaker." So what the honourable member and those opposite are seeking to convince the Australian people of is that Australia will be the only country in the world where we introduce efficiency standards and the price of vehicles goes up as a result. Didn't happen in the United States in 1975, Japan in 1985, China in 2005, South Korea in 2006, European Union in 2009, Canada in 2011, Mexico in 2013, India in 2014, or I think the Prime Minister's personal favourite, Saudi Arabia in 2016. Those woke warriors, Mr Speaker, at it again. That is why, Mr Speaker, Hyundai has said, for example, we think we will soon have a world-class efficiency standard in Australia, and we're excited by that. With a standard in place, Hyundai dealers will have a great range of vehicles to sell customers, and customers will have great vehicles to drive. And we will be doing our bit to reduce emissions in line with Australia's commitment to decarbonise. That's just one company, Mr Speaker.
Order. The Minister will pause. The Leader of the Opposition, a point of order.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. It was a very tight question, and it's hard to imagine that the minister is relevant when the question went to the fact that the Hilux goes up by 15,000.
You've made the point of order on relevance, and I've got that. You don't need to state the question again, right? Yeah. So you've made that point. Under this, you've given it. You've given it. You've given it. So I'll hear from the Leader of the House.
Bullied.
Just the Leader of the House. If the Leader of the Opposition wants to go into further detail regarding his point of relevance, he doesn't need to explain in great detail what the issue is. I understand that he believes the minister is not being relevant to the question.
Consideration, Mr Speaker.
No,
I can't give a point of order when he stands. Well, if
the Leader of the House will assist the House just by taking his seat. I just want to remind the Leader of the Opposition there's one point of order to be taken, and that's on relevance. So that's not an excuse to or a reason to restate the question, to add extra new information.
No.
That has not that has not been the practice.
I don't seek to do any of that, Mr Speaker.
Okay.
I seek to give you the information so that you might be properly informed, so as to rule on the point that I'm making, and that is on relevance. How can it be relevant when the minister has not mentioned the fact that under the government's proposal the Hilux goes up by $14,500?
Resume your seat. Yep. Yeah. So under the standing orders and the practice, for the benefit of the Leader of the Opposition and all members, because this is coming up yesterday and today, the point of order should not elaborate or make extra points. So whilst I appreciate the right of the Leader of the Opposition to make a point of order, it is simply not the case to be able to add extra statements or extra comments. So this is not going to continue on.
They're not facts. They're assertions.
Well, I haven't made a ruling, so I haven't made a ruling. I'm just explaining the process to the Leader of the Opposition. The Minister for Infrastructure, the Leader of the Opposition.
Well, Mr Speaker, just to be very clear, there is no additional commentary that has been included. I read directly from the question asked by the honourable member.
Yep.
There was no additional information introduced. So to characterise it in that way is to misrepresent the point of order that we made. And if your point is that you're going to rule that additional points of order can't be made on the basis that I've made them today, that is, with respect, that is outside of the standing orders. The point I made was to quote directly from the question from the honourable member. That is completely and absolutely in order.
Order. Members on my right. The Leader of the Opposition, the members will cease interjecting. The Leader of the Opposition has the right to raise a point of order. I just want to be clear. So the minister does not have to answer each aspect of the question to be relevant, and he's not obliged to answer every part of the question, as has been the rulings from Speaker Smith, Speaker Jenkins and Speaker Bishop, which I have in front of me. So it is important going forward that if the minister is not being relevant, but he doesn't need to answer exactly every aspect of the question. So you're entitled to raise the point of order. Yes, we agree on that. So the minister is answering the question. He's being directly relevant. He may not like the answer. I appreciate that, and it may be not the answer order. Well, we're just going to get on with the answer. The Leader of the Opposition will sit, and the minister has the call. No, resume your seat, Member Barker.
The standing order now.
No, well, I'm not giving you the call. Resume your seat. The minister. That's fair. Order. The member. I thought it was on the issue of relevance. Yeah. The member for Barker has the call.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, during the course of that discussion, there were not one but two unparliamentary remarks from the member for McEwen. I ask that you ask that he withdraw both.
Order. No. Resume your seat. Order. Resume your seat to assist the House. It's going to assist everyone if everyone ceases just with their interjections while I'm dealing with points of order. So I'm just going to ask the member for McEwen to, if he's made a unparliamentary, to withdraw his.
I haven't, and as the standing orders state and reps practice, what is an unparliamentary remark is not political sensitivities, which is what we're getting from that side. But I'm happy to withdraw if it helps you in the House.
Order. Order. Members, the member for Barker and the member for McEwen will cease their interjecting. Order. Order. When the House comes to order, order. So no more interjections from the member for McEwen or the member for Barker. That'll help us greatly. Thank you. For 45 seconds, we'll hear from the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
Well, Mr Speaker, there are some opposite who know that what the Leader of the Opposition is saying is untrue, not just the member for Bradfield. I will finish, Mr Speaker, with some support for the member for Bradfield from Senator Sharma, who said on the 5th of February, well, we are adopting increased fuel efficiency standards and that's a good thing. I don't have a problem with that. We should be doing that, and the fleet should be progressively getting cleaner and lower intensity emissions. The Leader of the Opposition should be more like Senator Sharma.
The call to the member for Werriwa.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Assistant Treasurer and Minister for Financial Services.
The member for Werriwa will just resume her seat, and the member for Barker, who's on a warning, who's had quite a bit to say this question time, will now leave the chamber under 94A. Order. 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 The member for Spence will also leave the chamber under 94A. That is unparliamentary. The House comes to order. We'll hear from the member for Werriwa.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Assistant Treasurer and Minister for Financial Services. How is the Albanese Labor government's fight against scammers helping Australians keep their money safe and ensuring people keep more of what they earn?
Give the call to the Assistant Treasurer and the Minister for Financial Services.
Thanks, Speaker. Can I thank the amazing member for Werriwa for that question? Can I also thank her for organising and inviting me to a great gathering at the Liverpool Catholic Club last week to discuss this very issue. In fact, it came the day after the member for Newcastle invited me to attend a gathering at the South Merewether to inform her constituents about these important consumer issues. And it is worth advising the House that it's now 297 days since the Coalition has had a Consumer Affairs spokesperson. I think it's important.
Order.
It is important that
order. The member for Wannon will state his point of order, not just give a statement.
Speaker, it's relevance. There was nothing about us asked for in that question. It
Resume your
really
seat.
was.
The question was about how is the government fighting against scammers, helping to keep Australians safe and keep more of what they earn. So, whilst the minister can explain the reasoning behind that, it is not within the standing orders for him to do a compare and contrast within this question. He has the call.
Thanks, Speaker. The Albanese government is committed to ensuring that Australians earn more and that they keep more of what they earn. And if they're saving from that money, or if they're investing, or if they're shopping online, we're committed to ensuring that we keep people's money safe. Now, we've come from a long way back, because when we came into government, there was an appalling track record left to us by the former government. Annual losses to scams were $3 billion a year. $3 billion a year.
Order.
They doubled,
No,
and then they doubled
Prime
again.
Minister, The Prime Minister will pause. I want the Deputy Leader the opportunity to withdraw that statement, and then she can leave the chamber on 94A.
Mr. Speaker, I withdraw.
I thank the member. Order. The Assistant Treasurer will be heard in silence.
Thank you, Speaker. So I'm simply making the point, if we continue the policies adopted by others, those losses per annum would go from $3 billion to $6 billion to $12 billion over the term of this parliament. The good news is, because of the policies that have been implemented by the Albanese government, they haven't. In fact, for the first time in years, we're seeing scam losses actually decline. And they've declined because we have put in place a range of measures, including standing up the world's first national anti-scam centre, which is taking the fight up to scammers, because you can't keep people safe unless you're keeping their money safe, and we're dedicated to ensuring we're keeping people's money safe. We've stood up the National Anti-Scam Centre. We've got the Australian Securities and Investment Commission pulling down fake websites, over 4,000 already. My friend, the Minister for Communications, is working with the telecommunications companies to ensure that they're blocking more and more, in fact millions of those menacing SMS messages. More work to come. Of course, it's not game over. We've got to continue taking the fight up to the scammers. It's why, Mr. Speaker, this year we'll be implementing tough new codes of practice. And those codes of practice will put obligations on banks, on social media companies, on telecommunications companies, to ensure we are doing more and more and more to keep people's money safe. We will not adopt the same policies of those opposite, which saw scam losses double and then double and then double again. We're committed to keeping people's money safe because we want them to earn more, to keep more of what they earn and to keep their money safe.
Give the call to the member for Durack.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. I refer to Labor's new family car and ute tax. In my home state of WA in 2023, 79.8% of sales were either SUVs or light commercial vehicles and utes. Top-selling cars are Toyota Hilux, Ford Ranger and the Isuzu D-Max. Industry analysis shows that they would attract penalties of around $14,000, $17,000 and $13,000 respectively. Why does this Labor government want to punish Aussie families and tradies for their choices?
Call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
Well, thanks, Mr. Speaker. I don't think the House will be surprised to learn that constituents in the honourable member for Durack's electorate drive particularly long distances. The average constituent of the member for Durack drives 23,154 kilometres a year, Mr. Speaker, and would save $1,841 a year by having more efficient vehicles from 2028 onwards, Mr. Speaker. The member refers to Western Australia. Perhaps that is why, perhaps those sorts of savings is why, the RACWA, the peak motoring group in Western Australia that actually represents the interests of motorists, drivers, consumers, called for the government to, and I quote, introduce an impactful mandatory fuel efficiency standard aligning Australia with the rest of the developed world as a top priority. The RACWA called on us to introduce an impactful mandatory fuel efficiency standard aligning Australia with the rest of the developed world as a top priority. That's exactly what we're doing. Aligning Australia with the rest of the developed world to give Australians the same access to fuel-efficient vehicles that those in the United States have, that those in Europe have, in New Zealand have, in China have, in India have. The only people who don't have access to those fuel-efficient vehicles as a matter of government policy are the motorists of Australia and Russia, Mr. Speaker. The Leader of the Opposition knows that and he says, "Niet. No, we're not having that, Mr. Speaker. Niet, we're not having that. We are going to stick out there with Russia as the only developed major economy without access to fuel efficiency standards." Well, that's not good enough as far as we're concerned. It might be good enough for the Leader of the Opposition, who has no plan for motorists to get access to more efficient vehicles, no plans of his own, despite the fact that, to their credit, the members for Bradfield and the then member for Kooyong tried to implement this policy in 2017, went to the then Shadow Minister for Transport, who is now the Prime Minister of Australia, and said, look, this is going to be controversial. Will we have opposition support? And the then Shadow Minister for Transport said, yes, you will. Yes, you will, because it's good policy. And we will back good policy, because that's what leadership looks like. That's what leadership looks like, Mr. Speaker. Seeing a good idea that might not be your idea and backing it. That's what the now Prime Minister did. and he is now the Prime Minister of Australia. The current Leader of the Opposition isn't doing that. Perhaps that's why he won't be Prime Minister of Australia.
Order. Order. The member for Fisher and O'Connor will cease interjecting, so I can hear from the member for Fraser.
My question is to the Prime Minister. How will new vehicle efficiency standards give Australians more choice and make it cheaper to run new cars? What is standing in the way of giving Australians access to cleaner cars?
Give a call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Fraser for his question. Of course, it was Roosevelt who said there was nothing to fear but fear itself. But fear is all they have over there. Fear is all they have. Just a second-hand scare campaign running on empty. Warmed up leftovers of governments past. To those opposite, a car is nothing more than a scare campaign on wheels. We've seen it with utes. We saw it when in the 2019 campaign they said that electric vehicles would end the weekend. Fuel standards are about giving Australians more choice of the latest vehicles that are cleaner and cheaper to run, which is why we offered bipartisan support when the Liberal Party, under that minister, wanted to introduce fuel efficiency standards. Every other developed country in the world has fuel efficiency standards except one, Russia. Well, the Leader of the Opposition can line up with Vladimir Putin. I'll line up with the United States and the rest of the developed world.
Order. The member
Russia,
for Broome and Bowman.
The country is famous for the quality of its cars as it is for the quality of its democracy. But this bloke thinks it's okay. He was there down in Dunkley at a used car yard, happy to stand up, trying to sell the Morrison scare campaign back of 2019. The Leader of the Opposition's used car model. It's noisy, it's unreliable, it only turns right, it only works in reverse, won't ever go forward, only goes backwards, it won't drive in Melbourne at night. You got to remember all those migrants. And it's made entirely of glass. Bit of a bold design move. From this guy. Like the bulldozer from Cook, who's left, it's designed to wreck, not to build. Well, what we're doing is building a stronger economy. What we're doing is saving Australians money. What we're doing is boosting their wages. What we're doing is cutting their taxes. What we're doing is building in new efficiencies, not being afraid of the future, shaping the future. Because if you don't, the future sorts you out. That's right. The fact is, you can't just pretend. You can't just pretend that this is not happening. When I was Transport Minister as far back as 2008, there wasn't research being done on an internal combustion engine. It was all about future vehicles that are cheaper to run, that are more efficient, which is what our policy. Mr. Speaker, I tabled the media release from today. Toyota launches all-new BZ4X BEV, a new vehicle SUV being launched by Toyota today. And on that note, I ask that further questions be placed on the notice paper.